Ladies and gentlemen, the CPU, also known as Central Processing Unit, is probably the most widely known term in computers today. Everyone's heard of it, but there's a question for gaming especially. What exactly does it do in terms of tasks, and how critical is it in terms of performance? Well, my name's Paul, and we're going to be investigating this since Intel and AMD are ever keen to sell us faster and faster processors. So, let's just jump right into it.
This video is focused on the very basics of CPU's tasks and functions, primarily for gaming. So in broad terms, a CPU's job is to carry out instructions of an application by means of arithmetic and logic operations. A processor's basic functions can be therefore summarized in just a few stages. Fetch involves the processor grabbing an instruction from memory, and then the next instruction, and then the next. It uses a program counter to know where data, instructions, are held in memory, and then the program counter and the instruction are placed together in the CPU's instruction register. Decode is perhaps the simplest of the stages to explain. The CPU simply figures out what the instruction is supposed to do and how to appropriately handle it. The last main stage is execute, where the now decoded instructions are sent to the appropriate parts of the CPU to be completed. While this is a pretty simplistic understanding of a processor and purposefully omits memory management and other such operations, it serves to at least provide a stepping stone for the rest of the video and its main subject: what a processor does for games. Modern games have an extremely large number of variables which processors need to keep track of. Player inputs, collision detection, calculating damage you just did to an enemy, running AI scripts for NPCs, and of course, submitting work for the graphics card to perform, such as what geometry it needs to draw or what textures it should use over the wall over there. And this brings us to multi-threading, which itself is a huge topic and will be covered more in a future video. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, processors were essentially a single core and handled a single hardware thread for the home consumer market. Then, Intel released the Pentium 4 with hyperthreading, allowing two threads to be scheduled on a single core. Fast forward a few more years and we started to see the first dual-core CPUs emerging for desktop. So why was this? Why this trend? Well, there's a lot of incentives for the moves to multi-core designs, and these include power requirements, reliability, and many more. Multi-core processors are more efficient than simply ramping up the clock speed. And making your application multi-threaded, assuming there's a lot of instructions to process, means it's a lot easier to take advantage of parallelism, allowing the CPU to always be busy while other instructions are being calculated and improving the raw throughput of the processor. It's important to note that not all games scale perfectly for a large number of processor cores, but the paradigm is starting to shift in that direction with the release of AMD's Ryzen and Intel's soon-to-be-released Coffee Lake. For games, that means on RTS titles, more troops can be on the ground as the game has more processor cores to calculate how these units will move around the terrain and respond under different conditions. For shooters, such as Battlefield, large and more realistic maps are available, with more processor horsepower to keep track of a large number of AI or player opponents and teammates. But, as we hinted earlier in this video, the CPU also tells the graphics card what to do. In many titles, this is easily one of the tasks which eats up most of the processor's horsepower. Especially on APIs which aren't that great of taking advantage of multi-core processors, you're going to start to see issues. A few years ago, there was a lot of discussion around DirectX 11 versus 12 and its inherent benefits, and the importance of low-level APIs as a whole. Although DirectX 12 brings a lot of benefits, perhaps the most recognized is the ability for games to take advantage of greater number of processor cores simultaneously, submitting a greater number of draw calls. One of the earliest examples of multi-threaded APIs was AMD's Mantle, which has since lived on in both the DirectX 12 and Vulkan APIs. We showed off the power of Mantle and how the infamous API overhead test in 3D Mark a number of years ago, and it still is a pertinent demonstration of how the APIs in the modern era have numerous performance benefits over the older cousins. While the CPU or GPU both process information, the way they do it and what they're best at is very different. A GPU doesn't directly access a storage device to load in new textures, and it doesn't read game instructions directly to know how to use those textures. Therefore, a CPU's job is to issue out batches of instructions, draw calls, which simply tells the GPU what to do. Draw this gun, paint it this particular colour, light this specific area and cast shadows here and render this at a particular resolution. Thus, the roles of processors are pretty well defined in games. They're directly responsible for running an application. Of course, how much optimization a developer chooses to put into a title comes down quite frequently to their experience. DirectX 12 has quite a number of titles which have clearly shown a performance benefit when switching to multi-cores, such as Civilization 6, and other side of the Appy Isles we've got Vulkan, and it's beautifully demonstrated in Doom's 2016 outing. For the future, we'll certainly see newer PC titles designed with multi-core in mind. Thanks to multi-core processors that increase sales on the PC and 8th generation of consoles firmly embracing multi-core. Microsoft, for example, now consider DirectX 11 legacy for the Xbox and are doing everything they can short of sending Marcus Phoenix over to developers' studios to growl menacingly to convince developers to push towards DirectX 12. For the short term, a modern quad-core CPU, even without multi-threading, will be sufficient for games, but in the longer term, this will doubtlessly change. If you want a bit of buying advice now, for mid-2017, buy a Ryzen 7 if you're looking to keep the CPU for a number of years for gaming due to the number of threads supported on the hardware. Otherwise, both Intel and AMD have compelling reasons for purchase.
In a future video, we'll be further examining which processor is right for you and help you make the better decision. For example, what's best for your budget, for your processor needs, and whether you have a preference, for example, from AMD or Intel. But that's for a future video. For this video, I think that just about wraps it up, and hopefully it gives you some insight into what the role is of a processor when it comes to gaming and how they function, at least as a basic. Perhaps in a future video we'll go more in depth into CPU and GPU functionality if you so desire. But for now, I'm going to get going, so hopefully you have enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.